There are loves that arrive like storms, sudden, devastating, impossible to ignore. And then there are loves that have always been there, quiet as snow, falling on an empty street, waiting for the one moment when they can finally be seen. This is the story of Maria and Lucas, of 7 days in December that held a lifetime of unspoken words, of a Christmas that became both a beginning and an ending. She came back wearing an engagement ring that caught the light like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. He had spent 8 years learning how to pretend he'd moved on, building a life in the only place she'd ever wanted to escape. Between them stood every word they'd never said, every moment they'd almost touched, every possibility they'd let slip away. What you're about to hear is the story of the Christmas when everything they'd buried came back to life, exactly when it was too late to do anything about it. Because sometimes the cruelest thing love can do is arrive at the one moment when you can't possibly let it stay. Maria Santos hadn't set foot in Millbrook in 8 years, and she'd planned to keep it that way. She'd built an entirely new life in Chicago, a career in architectural design, a downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, a fiancé named Christopher who worked in finance and took her to charity galas where everyone wore black and spoke in careful, measured tones. Christopher was exactly the kind of man her parents had always hoped she'd find: stable, ambitious, appropriate. He'd proposed 3 months ago at a French restaurant, presenting the ring with the same controlled confidence he brought to quarterly earnings presentations. Maria had said yes because it made sense, because at 31 you're supposed to stop waiting for lightning and start appreciating steady rainfall, because Christopher was good to her in all the ways that mattered on paper. The wedding was set for January 7th, less than 2 weeks after Christmas. Everything was arranged: the venue, the caterer, the photographer, who cost more than Maria's first car. Her dress hung in her closet in Chicago, ivory silk that made her look like someone who belonged in Christopher's world. All that remained was this final obligation: 1 week in Millbrook for Christmas, because her mother had called crying, saying that family traditions mattered, that her father wasn't getting younger, that this might be the last Christmas they'd all be together in the house where Maria had grown up. So Maria had packed her bags, kissed Christopher goodbye at O'Hare Airport, and boarded a plane that felt less like transportation and more like a time machine. With every mile that carried her closer to Millbrook, she felt herself becoming younger, smaller, less certain about everything she'd spent 8 years building. The town looked frozen in time when she arrived on the evening of December 18th. Main Street still had the same brick storefronts with their faded awnings, the same pharmacy with the same spinning rack of postcards nobody bought, the same diner where she'd spent countless hours as a teenager, drinking bad coffee and pretending to study. Christmas decorations hung from every lamppost, modest wreaths with red velvet bows, white lights strung between buildings, nothing like the elaborate displays in Chicago. The town square featured a Christmas tree that seemed smaller than she remembered, surrounded by a wooden fence that children had covered with handmade ornaments and crayon drawings. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, preserved like a photograph, beautiful in its stubborn refusal to change. Maria's father picked her up from the bus station in his old pickup truck, the same one he'd had since she was 16. He hugged her tight, smelling of wood smoke, and the peppermint candies he always kept in his shirt pocket. Her mother waited at home with dinner prepared: arroz con pollo, Maria's favorite, the house filled with the scent of garlic and cumin, and nostalgia so thick it was hard to breathe. That first evening passed in a blur of small talk and careful questions. Her mother wanted to know every detail about the wedding. Her father asked about her job in a tone that suggested he still wasn't entirely sure what an architectural designer actually did. Her younger brother Miguel, now 25 and working as a mechanic at the garage on Route 7, teased her about becoming fancy, about forgetting where she came from. Everyone carefully avoided mentioning the real reason Maria had stayed away so long, the reason she'd found excuses every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every summer. Nobody said his name. They didn't need to. His absence filled the room like a ghost at the dinner table. Maria went to bed that night in her childhood bedroom, which her mother had preserved exactly as she'd left it. Posters of bands she no longer listened to, photographs of friends whose lives had diverged from hers, a wooden jewelry box that played a tinny version of Swan Lake when you opened it. She lay awake, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars she'd stuck to the ceiling at 15, listening to the house settle around her, and tried to convince herself that she could make it through 1 week without seeing Lucas Rivera. She lasted exactly 12 hours. The next morning, December 19th, Maria woke to her mother's voice calling up the stairs, asking if she'd run to Bennett's bakery for fresh bread. Bennett's was a Millbrook institution, a corner bakery that had been there for 70 years, where locals gathered for coffee and pastries and the kind of slow-paced gossip that held small towns together. Maria hadn't been inside since the morning after high school graduation, the day before she'd left for college, when she'd sat at the corner table with Lucas and pretended everything was fine. But 8 years was long enough to erase ghosts, she told herself. Bennett's was just a bakery. Lucas probably didn't even go there anymore. He was probably married by now, living somewhere on the other side of town, completely moved on from whatever had existed between them in another lifetime. So Maria pulled on jeans and a thick sweater, wrapped herself in her winter coat, and walked the 4 blocks to Main Street. The morning was crystalline cold, the kind of December day where your breath turns to fog and the air smells like snow waiting to fall. Christmas lights looked tired in the daylight, dangling from storefronts like jewelry left on after a party. A few people walked the sidewalks, Mrs. Chen from the library, old Joe who'd been ancient even when Maria was young, a young mother pushing a stroller covered with a plastic rain shield. They all looked at Maria with that specific small-town recognition, the kind that said they knew exactly who she was and exactly how long she'd been gone. Bennett's bakery sat on the corner of Main and 3rd, its windows fogged with warmth, its interior glowing. Through the glass, Maria could see garlands of tinsel, a small Christmas tree in the corner covered with ornaments shaped like bread and cookies. She pushed open the door, and a bell chimed above her head, the same bell that had chimed 8 years ago, 10 years ago, her whole life ago. The bakery smelled like cinnamon and butter and coffee, smells so potent with memory that Maria felt momentarily dizzy. The cases were filled with the same pastries she remembered, conchas, pan dulce, cinnamon rolls the size of dinner plates. Behind the counter, Mrs. Bennett looked exactly the same, maybe a little grayer, still wearing her floral apron covered with flour. And sitting at the corner table, the exact table Maria had been remembering moments before, was Lucas Rivera. He looked up as the bell chimed, and for 3 seconds that stretched into infinity, their eyes met. Maria felt everything inside her stop, her breath, her heartbeat, her carefully constructed life in Chicago, because Lucas didn't look different. That was the problem. He looked exactly like himself, like every memory she'd tried to bury, like every possibility she'd spent 8 years pretending had never existed. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe she'd just forgotten. His dark hair was a little longer, curling slightly at his collar. He wore a blue flannel shirt and work boots, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug. He'd always had beautiful hands, long fingers that Maria used to watch as they sketched in notebooks, built things, fixed things, gestured when he talked about books he loved. Those hands had never touched her, not really, and that was the tragedy at the heart of everything. Lucas stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the old wooden floor. His expression was unreadable, surprise maybe, or pain, or nothing at all. 8 years was a long time to learn how to hide what you felt. Maria, he said, and just hearing him say her name made something crack open inside her chest. Lucas. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. I didn't know you still came here. Every morning. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Some of us are creatures of habit. The words carried weight they both recognized. Some of us stayed. Some of us left. Some of us built lives in the places we knew. Some of us ran away and never looked back. Mrs. Bennet was watching them with the delighted interest of someone who'd known them both since they were children, who'd probably watched their whole strange non-relationship unfold from behind her bakery counter. Maria Santos, as I live and breathe. We heard you were coming back for Christmas. How long has it been? 8 years, Mrs. Bennet. Maria forced herself to look away from Lucas, to approach the counter like a normal person doing a normal thing. My mother sent me for bread. I'll take a loaf of the sourdough, please. Coming right up, honey. And how long are you staying? Just until the 26th. Maria kept her voice light. I have to get back to Chicago. I'm getting married in January. She said it deliberately, clearly, making sure Lucas heard. Establishing boundaries. Explaining why she was here and why she'd be leaving and why nothing that had happened 8 years ago mattered anymore. But when she glanced back at him, Lucas's expression hadn't changed. He was still standing by his table, still watching her with those dark eyes that had always seen too much. Congratulations, he said quietly. I hope you'll be very happy. Thank you. Maria accepted the wrapped loaf from Mrs. Bennet, paid, and turned to leave. This was fine. This was manageable. They'd seen each other, exchanged pleasantries, and now she could go home and avoid Bennet's for the rest of the week. She'd gotten through the hard part. But as she reached the door, Lucas spoke again. Maria. She stopped, her hand on the doorknob, her back to him. Your mother invited mine for Christmas Eve dinner. My mom told me yesterday. I guess our families still do that tradition. Maria's chest tightened. Of course, the Rivera and Santos families had been friends for generations. Their mothers had grown up together. Every Christmas Eve they'd shared dinner, alternating houses each year. Maria had forgotten, or maybe she'd just let herself stop remembering. Right, she managed. I'll see you then, I guess. I guess so. A pause. It's good to see you, Maria, even if it's just for a week. She didn't trust herself to respond, so she just pushed through the door into the cold morning, the bell chiming behind her like a warning she should have heeded years ago. Maria walked home quickly, her breath coming fast, telling herself it was just the cold, just the exercise. The bread felt heavy in her hands. When she got back to the house, her mother was in the kitchen making coffee. Did you see anyone you knew? Her mother asked innocently, too innocently. Just Mrs. Bennet, Maria lied. Her mother hummed, a sound that suggested she knew better, but wouldn't push. Not yet. Oh, I forgot to mention, the Riveras are coming for Christmas Eve dinner. You remember how we always did that? Sylvia called yesterday to confirm. I hope that's all right. Of course, Mom. Why wouldn't it be? No reason, Mija, no reason at all. Maria spent the rest of the day unpacking, helping her mother with preparations, texting Christopher about inconsequential things, trying not to think about Lucas Rivera sitting at that corner table in Bennett's bakery, 8 years older but somehow exactly the same, looking at her like she was every answer to every question he'd never asked. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She lay in her childhood bed, staring at those glow-in-the-dark stars, and let herself remember what she'd spent 8 years trying to forget. She and Lucas had known each other their entire lives. They'd grown up 3 blocks apart, attended the same schools, sat in the same classrooms, but they'd never been friends, not really. They'd existed in parallel, always aware of each other, never quite connecting. Lucas had been quiet, artistic, the kind of boy who spent lunch periods reading instead of playing sports. Maria had been ambitious, driven, always talking about leaving Millbrook, about big cities and bigger lives. They should have had nothing in common. But during their senior year of high school, something had shifted. They'd been assigned as partners for a history project, and Maria had discovered that Lucas was funny, that he saw the world in ways that surprised her, that he listened when she talked, like her words actually mattered. They'd spent weeks working together, meeting at the library, at each other's houses, at Bennett's bakery. And slowly, carefully, something had grown between them that neither of them knew how to name. They never dated, never even came close. But everyone could see it. Their classmates, their families, Mrs. Bennett behind her bakery counter. There was something there, something unspoken but undeniable. Maria would catch Lucas watching her in class, and her heart would stumble. Lucas would smile at something she said, and she'd feel seen in a way that made her want to run and stay simultaneously. The problem was that Maria had spent her entire life planning to leave Millbrook, and Lucas had never wanted to be anywhere else. He loved the town, loved the quiet, loved having roots that went deep. He'd gotten accepted to colleges, good ones, but he'd turned them down to attend community college and help his father with the family carpentry business. His dreams were small and local and real. Maria's dreams were enormous and distant and entirely incompatible with staying in a town of 3,000 people where everyone knew everything about everyone. They never talked about it. That was the tragedy. They'd spent months circling around something that could have been beautiful, and neither of them had been brave enough to name it. On the last day of school, they'd sat together at Bennett's bakery, drinking coffee neither of them wanted. And Maria had told Lucas about her plans, college in Boston, internships in New York, a life that looked nothing like Millbrook. "That's amazing," Lucas had said, and he'd meant it. "You're going to do incredible things, Maria." You could come too," she'd said, even though she knew he wouldn't. "You could go anywhere. But I want to be here." He'd smiled that sad smile she'd never forgotten. "Some of us are built for staying, Maria. There's nothing wrong with that." She'd left the next day. They'd texted for a few months, but it had felt forced, painful. Eventually, the messages had stopped. Maria had thrown herself into college, into her career, into becoming someone new. She'd dated other people, built other relationships, convinced herself that whatever she'd felt for Lucas had been nothing more than teenage nostalgia, the last gasp of small-town childhood before real life began. And now she was 31, engaged to a man she respected but didn't quite love, back in Millbrook for 1 week, and Lucas Rivera still looked at her like she was the only person in any room, and it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair at all. Maria's phone buzzed on her nightstand. A text from Christopher. "Missing you already. Can't wait until you're back and we can get back to wedding planning. Love you." She stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Miss you too. Love you." The words felt hollow, but Maria had learned that sometimes you just had to say the right things and believe in them hard enough that they became true. The next 3 days passed in a careful dance of avoidance. Maria helped her mother with Christmas preparations, visited old family friends, went shopping at the small stores on Main Street. She saw Lucas twice from a distance, once walking past the hardware store, once getting into his truck outside the post office. Each time her heart lurched, and each time she turned away before he could see her seeing him. Christopher called every evening, talking about wedding details, about the honeymoon he was planning in Tuscany, about the apartment they'd be moving into after they married. Maria listened and responded appropriately, but her mind kept wandering to a corner table in Bennett's bakery, to dark eyes that had always seen too much. On December 22nd, Maria's mother asked her to drive out to the Christmas tree farm on the edge of town. The Santos family had always cut their own tree, a tradition Maria had forgotten existed in her years of buying pre-lit artificial trees from Target. Her father was busy at work, Miguel had plans, so Maria went alone, driving her father's old pickup through streets she'd once known by heart. The Christmas tree farm was exactly as she remembered. Rows of evergreens dusted with snow, the scent of pine sharp in the cold air, a small wooden shed where you paid and got your saw. Maria wandered through the trees, looking for the right one, her breath clouding in the December afternoon. You always liked the ones that were a little crooked. Maria spun around. Lucas stood a few yards away, his hands in the pockets of his jacket, snowflakes catching in his dark hair. He must have just arrived. His truck was parked near the shed. Lucas. Her heart was beating too fast. What are you doing here? Same thing you are. Annual tree shopping. He walked closer, his boots crunching on snow. My mom sent me. She's very particular about the tree. Has to be exactly 6.5 feet, perfectly symmetrical, not too sparse. He smiled. You'd think she was buying art for the Met. Despite everything, Maria laughed. My mom's the same way, except she likes them imperfect. She says perfect trees don't have character. Smart woman. Lucas stopped a few feet away, maintaining careful distance. So here we are. Two adults with very specific tree requirements. Here we are. Maria's chest felt tight. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, surrounded by evergreens and snow and all the words they'd never said. Finally, Lucas spoke, his voice careful. How have you been, Maria? Really? Good, busy. My job keeps me traveling a lot. Chicago, New York, sometimes Los Angeles. It's everything I wanted. And the wedding? You're excited? Maria forced a smile. Of course. Christopher is wonderful. Very stable, smart. He treats me well. That's not what I asked. The words were soft but sharp, cutting through her careful pretense. Maria looked at Lucas, really looked at him, and saw that he was still the same person who'd always been able to see through her. What do you want me to say, Lucas? I don't know. The truth, maybe? He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I'm sorry. That's not fair. You don't owe me anything. You never did. That's not true. Isn't it? You left. You built a whole life without looking back. That was always the plan, right? Get out of Millbrook, find something bigger, never settle for small-town life. His voice wasn't angry, just tired. I'm happy for you, Maria. I really am. I just wish... He stopped himself. Wish what? Lucas looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I wish we'd been brave enough to say goodbye properly. That's all. Instead of just letting it fade. Maria felt something crack inside her chest. We were kids, Lucas. We didn't know how. We weren't that young. He smiled sadly. We were just scared. Before Maria could respond, a family appeared through the trees, parents and 3 children, laughing and arguing about which tree to choose. The moment broke. Lucas took a step back. I should let you get back to tree shopping. He started to turn away, then paused. I'll see you on Christmas Eve, I guess. Our mother's dinner party. Lucas, wait! But Maria didn't know what she wanted to say, and Lucas didn't wait to find out. He walked away through the rows of evergreens, leaving Maria standing alone among the trees, wondering how you could miss someone who was never really yours to begin with. She eventually chose a tree, slightly crooked just like her mother liked, and drove home with it strapped to the truck bed, her mind spinning with everything Lucas had said and everything she hadn't. That evening, as she and her father set up the tree in the living room, her mother made hot chocolate and put on Christmas music. Miguel showed up with his girlfriend, a sweet girl named Sarah, who worked at the elementary school. They all decorated together, hanging ornaments that Maria remembered from childhood, the paper snowflake she'd made in first grade, the ceramic angel Miguel had broken and glued back together, the star for the top that had been her grandmother's. It should have been perfect. It was perfect. And yet Maria kept thinking about Lucas saying they'd never said goodbye properly, kept wondering if he was right, kept feeling like she was living inside a snow globe where everything looked beautiful, but nothing could change. Her phone buzzed, Christopher sending photos of the wedding venue, asking her opinion on centerpieces. Maria looked at the images, elegant, expensive, impersonal, and felt nothing. She texted back appropriate enthusiasm and tried not to think about what that meant. December 23rd arrived grey and cold, with snow forecast for Christmas Eve. Maria spent the morning helping her mother prepare for the dinner party, cleaning, cooking, setting out the good dishes that only appeared once a year. In the afternoon, her mother sent her to the grocery store for last-minute items, and Maria found herself driving past Bennett's Bakery, past the hardware store where Lucas worked with his father, past all the places that held memories she couldn't quite forget. At the grocery store, she ran into Mrs. Rivera, Lucas's mother. Sylvia Rivera had always been kind to Maria, treating her like a second daughter. She pulled Maria into a hug that smelled like vanilla and home. "Maria, look at you, all grown up and getting married. Your mother showed me pictures of your ring. It's beautiful, mija." "Thank you, Mrs. Rivera." Maria felt guilty, though she wasn't sure why. "Lucas mentioned he saw you at the tree farm yesterday. He said you looked well." "He looked well too." Sylvia studied her with the penetrating gaze of mothers everywhere. "That boy. He never could hide what he felt, not even when he tried. You know, he always—" She stopped herself, shook her head. "Never mind, that's ancient history. I'm just glad you two can still be friends." But they'd never been friends, Maria thought. That was always the problem. That evening, Maria lay in bed and let herself do what she'd been avoiding all week. She looked up Lucas's social media. His Facebook page was barely updated. A few photos of carpentry projects, a picture of him and his father at a job site, a post about a local theatre production he'd been in. No relationship status. No photos with anyone who looked like a girlfriend. Just Lucas, living his quiet life in Millbrook, exactly as he'd always said he would. Maria closed her laptop and stared at the ceiling. In 2 days, she'd leave Millbrook. In 2 weeks, she'd marry Christopher. In a year, she'd probably have forgotten that this week had ever felt significant. That's what she told herself. That's what she almost believed. Christmas Eve arrived with 6 inches of fresh snow and a sky that looked like more was coming. The Santos house smelled like roasting pork, rice and beans, and her mother's special Christmas cookies. Maria spent the day cooking alongside her mother and grandmother, the 3 generations working together in the kitchen, like they'd done every Christmas Eve when Maria was young. "You seem distracted, mija," her grandmother observed, her hands expertly shaping empanadas. "Just tired, abuela." Tired. Yes. Her grandmother's knowing look suggested she understood more than Maria wanted her to. Sometimes being back in old places makes us remember old feelings. That's natural. Doesn't mean we should do anything about them. Maria didn't ask how her grandmother knew. In small towns, everyone knew everything, even things you'd never said out loud. At 6 o'clock the doorbell rang. Maria heard her mother greeting the Riveras, heard the sound of coats being hung and greetings exchanged. She stayed in the kitchen, pretending to be busy with final preparations, delaying the inevitable. But eventually her mother called her, and Maria had no choice but to walk into the living room where Lucas stood with his parents, holding a bottle of wine and wearing a dark green sweater that made him look unfairly handsome. Their eyes met, and for a moment the room fell away. Then Lucas smiled, that careful, controlled smile he'd been giving her all week, and said, "Merry Christmas, Maria." "Merry Christmas, Lucas." Dinner was both easier and harder than Maria expected. They sat at opposite ends of the table, safely separated by her parents and his. The conversation flowed around them. Talk of town gossip, plans for Christmas Day, questions about Maria's upcoming wedding that she answered with practiced enthusiasm. Lucas was quiet, mostly listening, occasionally making observations that made everyone laugh. He'd always been like that, Maria remembered. Watchful, thoughtful, funny when you least expected it. After dinner, the families moved to the living room for dessert and coffee. The Christmas tree glowed in the corner, and someone put on Nat King Cole. Maria's father broke out the rum, and the adults got cheerful and nostalgic, telling stories about Christmases past, about when Maria and Lucas were children, about traditions that had been kept and others that had faded. "Remember the Christmas pageant when you were both 12? Maria's mother laughed. "Maria was supposed to be Mary, and Lucas was a shepherd, and he got stage fright and forgot all his lines." "I remember," Lucas said quietly, glancing at Maria. "Maria covered for me, made up lines so I wouldn't just stand there in silence." "I'd forgotten that," Maria admitted. "I hadn't." Lucas held her gaze for a beat too long, and Maria felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. Around 9 o'clock, Miguel and Sarah announced they were going to midnight mass at St. Catherine's. Maria's mother suggested they all go together, like they used to. Everyone agreed, bundling back into coats and scarves, walking through the snowy streets toward the church where Maria had been baptized, confirmed, where she'd spent countless Sundays learning how to pray for things she'd never receive. The church was warm and crowded, smelling of incense and candles. The service was familiar, readings Maria knew by heart, hymns she'd sung 1,000 times. She sat between her mother and Miguel, very aware that Lucas was 3 rows behind her with his parents. She tried to focus on the priest's words, on the story of a birth that changed everything, but her mind kept wandering. After Mass, outside in the snow under a sky full of stars, families lingered, greeting each other, wishing everyone Merry Christmas. Maria stood with her parents, talking to old neighbors, when she felt someone beside her. "Walk with me?" Lucas asked quietly. Maria glanced at her parents, but they were deep in conversation with the Riveras. "Sure." They walked away from the crowd, down the quiet street toward the town square. The Christmas tree glowed in the darkness, covered in lights and homemade ornaments. Snow fell softly, catching in their hair, dissolving on their skin. "I need to tell you something," Lucas said finally, "and I know I shouldn't. I know it's terrible timing, and I know you're getting married in 2 weeks, and I know I have absolutely no right to say this after 8 years of silence, but I can't let you leave again without telling you." Maria's heart was racing. "Lucas!" "I loved you, Maria. Back in high school, I loved you. I've never stopped loving you, not in 8 years, not even when I tried." He looked at her, his eyes dark and honest in the glow of the Christmas lights. "I know that's not fair. I know you've built a life. But you asked what I wished at the tree farm, and this is it. I wish I'd been brave enough to tell you before you left. I wish I'd asked you to stay, or us to come with you, or done anything except just let you go. I wish I'd fought for us instead of accepting that we were impossible." Maria felt tears on her cheeks, hot against the cold air. "Lucas, you don't have to say anything. I'm not asking you to change your life. I just needed you to know that you were loved, that you are loved. That whatever happens, someone in this world sees you exactly as you are and thinks you're everything." He reached out, almost touched her face, then dropped his hand. "That's all. That's all I wanted to say." They stood in silence, snow falling around them, the Christmas tree glowing behind Lucas's shoulder like a benediction or a curse. Maria's mind was spinning. 8 years ago, if Lucas had said these words, everything would be different. She would have stayed, or he would have come, or they would have found some impossible compromise. But 8 years ago he'd said nothing, and she'd left, and now she was engaged to someone else, and it was too late, too late, too late. "I thought about you," Maria whispered, "every day for the first year, every week for the second. It got easier after that, or I told myself it did, but I never forgot you, Lucas. I never stopped wondering what would have happened if we'd been braver. And now, his voice was rough with emotion. What do we do now? Maria looked at him, at this man who'd loved her for 8 years in silence, who'd stayed in Millbrook waiting for something that was never going to arrive, who was looking at her like she was every song he'd never written and every dream he'd never chased. Now nothing changes, she said, even though it was killing her. I'm getting married, Lucas. I made a commitment. Christopher is a good man. He deserves— Do you love him? Lucas interrupted. Really love him? The way people should love each other when they're promising forever? Maria opened her mouth to say yes, but the word wouldn't come. Because the truth was, she didn't love Christopher the way she'd loved Lucas at 18. The way she apparently still loved Lucas right now, standing in the snow on Christmas Eve with her whole heart breaking open. She loved Christopher the way you love safety, comfort, the absence of risk. It wasn't the same thing. It had never been the same thing. That's not fair, she said instead. Nothing about this is fair, Maria, but that doesn't make it less real. A church bell chimed midnight. Christmas Day. Somewhere in the town, families were exchanging gifts. Children were sneaking downstairs to see what Santa brought. The world was celebrating joy and hope and new beginnings. And Maria stood with Lucas in the snow, knowing that this was both the best and worst Christmas of her life. I can't leave him at the altar, Maria said finally. I can't do that to Christopher, to his family, to everyone who's expecting us to— She stopped, choking on tears and words she couldn't take back. Lucas nodded slowly. I know, and I'm not asking you to. I just needed you to know the truth. For once in our lives, I needed us to be honest with each other. What do we do now? Maria echoed his earlier question. We say goodbye. Lucas smiled, but it was the saddest thing Maria had ever seen. Properly this time, not just letting it fade, actually saying it. I don't want to say goodbye. I know, but we have to. He reached out, took her hand, squeezed it once. His skin was warm despite the cold. Thank you for the week, Maria. Even if it hurt, even if it was impossible, I'm glad I got to spend this time with you. I'm glad I got to see the person you became. Maria squeezed his hand back, memorizing the feeling, knowing she'd never touch him like this again. Lucas, if things were different, but they're not, and that's okay. Some loves exist just to teach us that we're capable of feeling something that big. They don't all get to be lived. He let go of her hand. Merry Christmas, Maria. I hope you have a beautiful wedding. I hope Christopher knows how lucky he is. I hope you're happy. Lucas. But he was already walking away, back toward the church where their families were probably looking for them, his footprints dark in the fresh snow. Maria stood alone by the Christmas tree, crying, knowing that she'd just experienced the most honest moment of her adult life, and that it had come 8 years too late to change anything. She walked back to the church slowly, wiping her tears, composing her face. By the time she rejoined her parents, she looked normal or close enough. They all walked home together, her mother and Sylvia Rivera chatting about tomorrow's plans, their fathers discussing something about a broken furnace. Lucas walked ahead with Miguel and Sarah, never looking back. At home, Maria's parents stayed up for another hour, but Maria claimed exhaustion and went to her room. She sat on her bed, still in her coat, staring at nothing. Her phone buzzed. Christopher sending a sweet message about missing her, about how in 2 weeks they'd be married and starting their life together. Maria stared at the message for a long time before turning off her phone without responding. She'd spent 8 years building a life that made sense, that fit the plan she'd made at 18, that proved she was someone who achieved goals and didn't let fear or sentiment derail her trajectory. She'd found a good man, built a successful career, created a version of herself that her parents could be proud of and her high school classmates could envy. She'd done everything right. So why did it feel like she'd gotten everything wrong? Maria lay in bed, not sleeping, watching the shadows move across her ceiling. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering Millbrook in white silence. She thought about Lucas walking away from her, thought about Christopher waiting for her in Chicago, thought about the wedding dress hanging in her closet 1,000 miles away. She thought about all the choices that had led to this moment, all the words left unsaid, all the roads not taken. At some point near dawn, Maria fell into fitful sleep. She dreamed of Christmas trees and snow and Lucas's voice saying, "Some loves exist," just to teach us that we're capable of feeling something that big. She woke on Christmas morning to her mother knocking on her door, calling her down for breakfast. The Santos family opened presents together, small gifts, nothing extravagant, the kind of presents that showed someone had been paying attention to who you really were. Her father gave her a book about sustainable architecture. Miguel gave her a framed photo of the two of them as children, both grinning, gap-toothed at the camera. Her mother gave her a necklace that had belonged to her grandmother, a simple silver chain with a tiny cross. "For you're something old," her mother said, fastening it around Maria's neck. "Every bride needs something old on her wedding day." Maria touched the necklace, feeling the weight of tradition, of family, of expectations she'd been carrying her whole life. "Thank you, Mom. It's beautiful." They spent Christmas Day the way they always had. A big lunch with extended family, cousins Maria barely remembered, aunts who asked intrusive questions about her wedding plans and when she'd have children. She smiled and answered politely, feeling like she was playing a role in a play she'd never auditioned for. In the afternoon, she went for a walk by herself, needing air, needing space to think. She found herself walking toward Main Street without consciously deciding to go there. The town was quiet. Most businesses closed for the holiday, families gathered in warm houses. Maria walked past Bennett's Bakery, past the hardware store, past all the places that held 8 years of almost. She stopped in front of the Rivera carpentry shop. Through the window, she could see the workshop, tools hanging on pegboards, sawdust on the floor, half-finished projects on workbenches. This was Lucas's world, the life he'd chosen, the place where he'd poured all the passion and creativity that Maria had once wanted him to bring to a bigger stage. She'd thought his choice was small, limiting, a waste of his potential. But standing there looking through the window, Maria wondered if maybe Lucas had understood something she'd missed. That there was value in staying, in building something real with your hands, in being part of a community that knew your name. Her phone rang. Christopher. Maria stared at his name on the screen, her thumb hovering over the answer button. Finally, she accepted the call. "Merry Christmas," she said, her voice sounding hollow even to herself. "Merry Christmas, babe. God, I miss you." "This week has felt like forever." Christopher sounded cheerful, energized. "I've been working on the seating chart with the wedding planner. We're going to put your college friends at table 6, my work colleagues at... Maria, are you there?" "I'm here." "You sound weird. Is everything okay?" Maria looked at the carpentry shop, at the snow falling past the streetlights, at the small town she'd spent 8 years running from. "Christopher, can I ask you something?" "Of course, anything." Why do you want to marry me?" A pause. "What? Maria, what kind of question is that?" "A serious one. Why me?" "Because you're brilliant and beautiful and successful. Because we make sense together. Because we have the same goals and values. Because you're the kind of woman I've always wanted to marry." He sounded confused, maybe a little hurt. "Where is this coming from? Do you love me?" The words came out before Maria could stop them. "Really love me, Christopher. Not the idea of me, not what I represent, but actually me." "Of course I love you. We're getting married in 2 weeks. Why are you asking me this now?" But he hadn't said yes, Maria noticed. He'd said, of course. He'd pointed to the wedding as evidence, but he hadn't actually said the words, maybe because he didn't know how. Maybe because they'd built their relationship on compatibility and convenience, rather than the kind of love that made you brave and stupid and willing to risk everything. "I think I need to tell you something," Maria said slowly. "Okay." Christopher's voice had gone careful, guarded. Maria took a deep breath. This was it. The moment where everything changed or stayed the same, where she chose between the life she'd planned and the life she was starting to realize she actually wanted. "I saw someone this week, someone from my past, and it made me realize—" "Maria, don't." Christopher cut her off. "Whatever you're about to say, don't. You're just having cold feet. It's normal. Every bride gets nervous before the wedding. But we've come this far. We've made all these plans. Our families are counting on us. You can't throw it all away because you ran into some old boyfriend and got nostalgic. He wasn't my boyfriend. That's the problem. He should have been. This is insane. You're being emotional and irrational. You're going to come home in 2 days, and you're going to realize you're being ridiculous. And we're going to laugh about this. About how you almost ruined everything over some small-town guy you knew in high school." Maria felt something harden inside her chest. "His name is Lucas, and you don't get to dismiss him like that." "I'm not dismissing him. I'm dismissing this whole situation. Maria, I've invested 2 years in this relationship. My parents have spent $40,000 on this wedding. We've sent out invitations to 200 people. You can't just—" "Invested," Maria repeated. "You said invested, Christopher. Like I'm a stock option, like our relationship is a business deal. That's not what I meant, but it's what you said." Maria felt suddenly perfectly clear. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe we've been treating this like a merger instead of a marriage. Two people who look good on paper, who make sense logically, who can build a comfortable life together. But Christopher, comfort isn't enough. It never was. "Maria, you're making a huge mistake. If you do this, if you call off the wedding, we're done. I'm not going to wait around while you work through whatever crisis you're having." "I know," Maria said quietly. "I understand." "So what are you saying? You're actually going to throw away everything we've built together for some fantasy about a guy you haven't seen in 8 years? "No," Maria said. "I'm going to throw it away because I don't love you the way I should. Because you deserve someone who thinks you're everything, not just good enough, because I've been lying to both of us by pretending that practical love is the same as real love." Silence on the other end of the line. Then Christopher's voice, cold and controlled. "Fine. Consider the wedding off. Don't bother coming back to Chicago. I'll have your things shipped to your parents' house. We're done." He hung up. Maria stood in the snow, staring at her phone, feeling both terrified and free. She'd just blown up her entire life, ended her engagement, probably lost her apartment, maybe her job since Christopher's father owned the firm where she worked. She'd destroyed months of planning and thousands of dollars in deposits and the expectations of everyone who'd been counting on her to follow through. And yet, standing there in the cold on Christmas evening in Millbrook, Maria felt lighter than she had in years. She walked home slowly, rehearsing what she'd tell her parents, how she'd explain that the wedding was off without explaining exactly why. But when she got home and saw her mother sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, the look on Mama Santos's face told her that explanations wouldn't be necessary. "You called it off," her mother said. "Not a question." Maria nodded, tears starting to fall. "Mum, I'm so sorry. I know you were excited. I know everyone was counting on— Mija, come here." Her mother pulled Maria into her arms, holding her the way she had when Maria was small and hurt. "I've been married to your father for 33 years. I know what love looks like, and I know what fear looks like. What you had with Christopher, that was fear pretending to be love. But the wedding, all the plans can be changed. Money can be refunded. What can't be fixed is marrying the wrong person and spending your life wondering what if." Her mother pulled back, looking Maria in the eyes. Is this about Lucas? Maria wiped her tears. How did you know? Because I've watched that boy love you since you were 16 years old. And I've watched you love him back and pretend you didn't. Her mother smiled sadly. You were always so determined to leave, to prove you were bigger than this town. But maybe what you were really running from was the possibility of staying, of choosing something small and real over something big and empty. I hurt him, Mom. Last night he told me he'd loved me for 8 years, and I told him I was still getting married, and now I'm not. But it's not because of him, it's because I finally admitted I was lying to myself. But how do I explain that? How do I tell him that calling off my wedding isn't a declaration of love for him? It's just me finally being honest about what I don't want. You tell him the truth, Mija. That's all any of us can do. Tell him the truth and let him decide what to do with it. Maria spent that evening with her family, explaining to her father and Miguel what had happened. Her father, practical as always, asked about logistics. Her apartment, her job, her things. Miguel just hugged her and said he was proud of her for being brave. They ordered pizza because no one felt like cooking, and they watched old Christmas movies on TV, and it felt like being 16 again, before anything got complicated. That night Maria lay in bed and thought about what came next. She'd have to figure out work, housing, her entire future. She'd probably have to leave Chicago, start over somewhere new. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead it felt like possibility. Like the first time in 8 years, she got to choose what she wanted instead of following a plan she'd made before she knew who she really was. But first, she needed to talk to Lucas. Not to tell him she loved him. She did, she knew that now, but because he deserved to know that his honesty had changed something, that his bravery had given her permission to be brave too. The next morning, December 26th, Maria woke early. She dressed carefully. Jeans, a soft sweater, her grandmother's necklace at her throat. She told her mother she was going out, ignored her mother's knowing smile, and walked through the cold morning toward the address she'd had memorized since she was 17. Lucas's house was a small craftsman bungalow on Oak Street with a front porch and flower boxes that would be full of geraniums in summer. His truck was in the driveway, so she knew he was home. Maria stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, gathering courage, then walked up and knocked on the door. Lucas answered in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair messy, his eyes widening when he saw her. "Maria, what are you... Is everything okay? Can I come in?" He stepped aside wordlessly, and Maria walked into his house for the first time. It was exactly what she'd expected. Warm, comfortable, full of books and plants and furniture he'd probably built himself. She could see his workshop through the back door, could imagine him spending hours there, creating beautiful things with those beautiful hands. "I called off my wedding," Maria said, turning to face him. Lucas went very still. "What?" "Yesterday, Christmas Day. I called Christopher and told him I couldn't marry him. The wedding's off, the engagement's over, it's done." "Maria!" Lucas looked stunned. Maybe hopeful, maybe just confused. "Why?" "Because you were right. I didn't love him. Not really. Not the way people should love each other when they're promising forever." Maria took a breath. "But I need you to understand something, Lucas. I didn't call off my wedding for you. I called it off for me. Because I've spent 8 years running toward the wrong things, and I needed to stop before I ran so far I couldn't find my way back." "I understand," Lucas said quietly. "Do you? Because I'm not here to tell you that I'm choosing you instead of Christopher. I'm here to tell you that I'm finally choosing myself, figuring out what I actually want instead of what I'm supposed to want." Maria moved closer to him. "But what I discovered when I did that, what I finally admitted to myself after 8 years of pretending otherwise, is that what I want is you. It's always been you, since we were 18 years old and too scared to say it. You've been the person who made me feel seen. who made me feel like I could be ambitious and scared and imperfect all at once. Lucas was staring at her like she was something he'd dreamed and couldn't quite believe was real. "Maria, are you saying—" "I'm saying I love you. I love you. And I'm terrified, because loving you means staying in Millbrook, or at least not running away from it anymore. It means building a life that looks nothing like the one I planned. It means admitting that maybe I was wrong about everything I thought I wanted." She laughed, tears on her cheeks. "I'm saying I don't have a job or an apartment or a plan. I'm saying I just destroyed my entire life based on a feeling and a conversation in the snow on Christmas Eve. I'm saying I'm a complete mess, and I have no idea what happens next, but I want to figure it out, and I want to figure it out with you, if you'll still have me after everything." Lucas crossed the space between them in 2 steps, cupped her face in his hands, looked at her with those dark eyes that had always seen everything. "Are you sure? Because, Maria, if we do this, if we try, I need you to be sure. I can't watch you leave again. I can't be the thing you settle for when your big dreams don't work out. You're not a consolation prize, Lucas. You're the dream I was too stubborn to admit I had." Maria put her hands over his, holding them against her face. "I'm not promising it will be easy. I'm probably going to freak out sometimes about giving up my career, about what people will think, about whether I'm making another mistake. But I'm sure about you. I'm sure that 8 years ago we should have been brave enough to try, and I'm sure that we deserve the chance to try now." Lucas smiled, and it was like sunrise breaking over snow. "8 years," he murmured. "We wasted 8 years. Then let's not waste any more." He kissed her then, finally, after 8 years of almost. It was soft and desperate and perfect, tasting like coffee and possibility and all the words they'd never said. Maria felt something inside her chest unfold, something that had been clenched tight since she was 18 years old, holding its breath, waiting for permission to hope. When they pulled apart, Lucas was smiling. "So, what now? What's your plan, Maria Santos?" "I don't have one. For the first time in my life, I don't have a plan, and it's terrifying and wonderful." She laughed. "I need to find work, figure out where I'm going to live. Maybe I'll see if there are any architecture firms nearby, or maybe I'll do something completely different. Maybe I'll help you build furniture. Maybe I'll teach art at the high school. Maybe I'll waitress at Rosie's Diner while I figure it out. I have no idea." "You could stay here," Lucas said carefully. "With me. I mean, not forever, not unless you want to, but while you figure things out. I have a spare room. It could be yours." Maria looked around his small, comfortable house, imagined waking up here, drinking coffee in his kitchen, slowly building a life that looked nothing like the one she'd planned, and everything like what she actually wanted. "I'd like that," she said. "A lot." They spent the rest of that morning talking, making up for 8 years of silence. Lucas told her about his business, about the furniture he built, about the life he'd created in Millbrook. Maria told him about Chicago, about her failed engagement, about slowly realizing that success and happiness weren't always the same thing. They made plans, tentative and uncertain. Maria would go back to Chicago to pack up her things, officially end her lease, face Christopher one final time. She'd come back to Millbrook after New Year's, stay with Lucas while she figured out next steps. Maybe she'd find work nearby. Maybe she'd start her own design consultancy. Maybe she'd discover that there were ways to be ambitious that didn't require abandoning everything familiar. In the afternoon, they walked through town together, holding hands for the first time in their lives. They stopped at Bennett's Bakery, and Mrs. Bennett took one look at them and burst into tears of joy. They ran into Maria's mother at the grocery store, and she hugged Lucas like he was already family. They sat in the town square as the sun set, watching children play in the snow around the Christmas tree, and Maria felt something she hadn't felt in 8 years. She felt home. That evening, they had dinner at Maria's parents' house. Maria and Lucas, Miguel and Sarah, her parents making far too much food and asking intrusive questions about their plans that neither of them could answer yet. But it felt right, felt like the beginning of something instead of the end. After dinner, Maria and Lucas walked back to his house through streets covered in snow, under stars so bright they looked close enough to touch. They stood on his porch, neither wanting the day to end. "I can't believe this is real," Maria said. 24 hours ago I was engaged to someone else. Now I'm here with you, planning a completely different future. "Are you scared?" Lucas asked. "Terrified, but in a good way. In a way that feels like living instead of just surviving." She squeezed his hand. "Lucas, I need you to know something. I'm going to mess this up sometimes. I'm going to doubt myself, wonder if I'm making a mistake, get frustrated with small-town life. I'm probably going to be difficult and complicated and not always certain this is right." "I know," he said simply, "and I'm still going to love you. I've loved you through 8 years of nothing, Maria. I can love you through the messy parts of something." Maria felt tears on her cheeks again, but they were good tears this time, the kind that came from being seen completely and loved anyway. "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky. Finally." Lucas pulled her close, and they stood there on his porch as snow began to fall again, soft and silent, covering everything in white. Maria flew back to Chicago on December 27th. She spent 3 painful days packing up her apartment, having awkward conversations with mutual friends, facing Christopher one final time to return his ring and apologize for the hurt she'd caused. He was cold, businesslike, already moving on to someone who would be a better investment. Maria felt sad for him, for what they'd almost done to each other, but she didn't regret her choice. She celebrated New Year's Eve alone in her empty apartment, toasting at midnight to new beginnings and the courage to choose wrong over right if wrong felt more honest. The next day, she loaded everything she owned into a rented truck and drove west toward Massachusetts, toward Millbrook, toward Lucas. He was waiting for her when she arrived, standing in the driveway of his house with snow in his hair and that smile that made her feel like coming home. They unloaded her things together, filling his spare room with her books and clothes and the accumulated pieces of a life she was learning how to rebuild. That night, they sat on his couch drinking wine, and Maria told him about Chicago, about the hardest parts of leaving, about the relief of finally being honest. Lucas told her about the carpentry commission he'd just gotten, about plans to expand his business, about the house down the street that was for sale if Maria ever wanted her own place, or if they ever wanted something bigger together. "No pressure," he added quickly, "just mentioning it's there." Maria laughed. "Slow down. We have time. For the first time in 8 years, we actually have time." They stayed up until 3 in the morning, talking and laughing and occasionally falling into comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only exists between people who don't need to fill every moment with noise. And when Maria finally went to bed in Lucas's spare room, she lay awake, staring at an unfamiliar ceiling, listening to Lucas move around in his own room down the hall, and felt something she'd been chasing for years without knowing it: peace. The next weeks were strange and wonderful and terrifying. Maria applied for jobs, networked with local architecture firms, started to build connections in a professional world she'd thought she'd left behind. She was surprised to discover that Western Massachusetts had a thriving design community, that there were interesting projects and creative people, that you didn't have to live in a major city to do meaningful work. She and Lucas fell into a rhythm. Coffee together in the mornings, work during the day, dinners either cooked at home or at Rosie's Diner. They went to movies at the old theater on Main Street, attended town events, slowly navigated what it meant to be together after years of almost. They argued sometimes, usually about small things, Lucas's tendency to leave tools everywhere, Maria's neurotic need to plan everything. But they always talked through it, always came back to the fundamental truth that they were better together than apart. In March, Maria got offered a position at a sustainable design firm in Northampton, 30 minutes from Millbrook. It wasn't as prestigious or high-paying as her Chicago job, but the work was interesting and the people were kind, and it felt like hers in a way her old career never had. She accepted immediately. In April, she and Lucas talked seriously about the future, about moving in together officially, about what they wanted long-term, about whether Maria could really be happy in Millbrook after dreaming of bigger things for so long. Maria admitted she still got restless sometimes, still wondered if she'd made the right choice, but she also admitted that she'd never been happier, never felt more herself, never felt more loved. In June, they moved into that house down the street together, a small Victorian that needed work but had good bones. They spent weekends renovating, Lucas teaching Maria how to use power tools, Maria teaching Lucas about load-bearing walls and spatial design. They built a life together board by board, wall by wall, room by room. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after their confession in the snow, Lucas took Maria back to that spot by the town square. The Christmas tree glowed behind them, exactly as it had the year before. Snow was falling, exactly as it had before, but everything was different. "A year ago," Lucas said, holding both her hands, "I told you I loved you when it was too late. When you were about to marry someone else, when I thought I'd lost you forever. I've spent this whole year being grateful that somehow, impossibly, I got another chance." "Lucas," Maria started, but he shook his head. "Let me finish. This year, I want to tell you I love you when it's not too late, when it's exactly the right time, when we have our whole future ahead of us instead of just one impossible week." He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Maria's breath caught. "Maria Santos, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you the way I should have started loving you 8 years ago?" Maria looked at him, at this man who'd waited for her, who'd been brave enough to tell her the truth when it mattered, who'd built a life with her from scratch and made her believe that coming home wasn't the same as giving up. And she thought about the Christmas a year ago, about standing in this exact spot, thinking that love had come too late, that some things were impossible, that timing mattered more than truth. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Lucas. 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, something he'd made himself, she realized, carved wood inlaid with a thin band of silver, uniquely beautiful and entirely them. They kissed there in the snow, under the Christmas tree, in the exact spot where they'd admitted the truth a year ago. But this time, the truth wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The next year passed in a blur of wedding planning, of Maria designing their dream house extension, of Lucas's business growing, of Sunday dinners with both their families. They got married on a perfect October day, not in some expensive venue in Connecticut, but in St. Catherine's Church, where they'd both been baptized, with Mrs. Bennet making the cake and half the town in attendance. Maria wore her grandmother's necklace and a dress she'd designed herself. Lucas cried when he saw her walking down the aisle. They promised forever in front of everyone they loved, and this time the promises felt true. But sometimes, late at night, Maria would think about that Christmas, about the week they'd almost missed, about Christopher and the wedding that never happened, about standing in Bennett's bakery and feeling her entire carefully planned life crack open. She'd think about how close they'd come to never happening, about all the ways timing could have defeated them, about the strange grace of Lucas's bravery and her mother's wisdom and her own willingness to finally choose honestly. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas would ask, pulling her closer. "That Christmas," she'd say, "the one where we almost lost each other." "The one where we found each other," he'd correct. "Finally." And Maria would agree because he was right. It hadn't been too late after all. It had been exactly the right time, the moment when they'd both been ready to be brave, to be honest, to choose love, even when it looked like loss. Years later, they'd tell their children the story of how they'd known each other their whole lives, but didn't fall in love until they were 31. They'd talk about the Christmas when everything changed, about the week that shouldn't have happened but did, about how sometimes love arrives exactly when you think it's too late, and that's what makes it perfect. They'd leave out some parts: the pain of that week, the impossibility, the engagement ring that Maria returned, the life she'd walked away from. Those details felt too raw, too personal, too much like wounds that had healed but still ached in cold weather. Instead, they'd focus on the magic, the snow, the Christmas tree, the moment when someone finally had the courage to tell the truth. They'd make it sound like a fairy tale, like something inevitable and destined, like love had always been waiting for them to be ready. And maybe it had been. Maybe that was the secret that took them 8 years to learn, that love doesn't arrive early or late, wrong time or right time. It arrives when you're finally brave enough to let it in, when you're finally honest enough to admit what you want, when you're finally ready to risk everything for something real. Maria had spent 8 years chasing a version of success that looked impressive from the outside, but felt hollow from within. She'd almost married the wrong person for the right reasons. She'd almost sacrificed love for logic, heart for head, truth for appearances. But then Lucas had stood in the snow on Christmas Eve and said, "I loved you, I've always loved you." And something inside Maria had finally broken open. Not broken apart, broken open, like ice cracking to let the water flow, like a seed splitting to let the plant grow. She'd spent 8 years building walls, and Lucas's honesty had given her permission to finally let them fall. The truth was, Maria still sometimes wondered about the road not taken. She'd see photos of her old colleagues at conferences in Paris or Tokyo, would hear about promotions and awards and opportunities in cities where things happened faster and bigger. Part of her would always be ambitious, would always want more, would always wonder if staying in Millbrook meant settling. But then she'd come home to Lucas, to the house they'd built together, to the life they were creating one small choice at a time. She'd remember what it felt like to be seen, to be loved, to be chosen not for what she could provide, but for who she actually was. And she'd realize that she'd never been settling. She'd been choosing, deliberately, honestly, bravely choosing what mattered over what looked good, what felt true, over what made sense. On their 5th anniversary, Maria and Lucas went back to that spot by the town square. It was Christmas Eve again. Snow falling, the tree glowing with lights and homemade ornaments. They stood exactly where they'd stood that first time, when Lucas had confessed his love and Maria had told him it was too late. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked quietly. "Giving up your career in Chicago, staying here, choosing this life?" Maria thought about it honestly, the way she'd learned to be honest since that Christmas 5 years ago. "I regret the time we lost," she said finally. "I regret that we didn't do this 8 years sooner, but I don't regret choosing you. I don't regret coming home. I don't regret any of it. Even when you get restless? Even when you see what you could have had?" "Especially then," Maria said. "Because what I could have had was impressive and empty and fundamentally untrue. What I have now is real. And Lucas, real is so much better than impressive." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, tasting like snow and coffee, and 5 years of choosing each other every single day. Around them, Millbrook glowed with Christmas lights, unchanged and unchanging, the same small town Maria had once been so desperate to escape. But she wasn't desperate anymore. She was home. And home, she'd finally learned, wasn't about the size of the place or the opportunities it offered or how impressive it looked on a resume. Home was about being known, being loved, being brave enough to let yourself be both. That night, they went to midnight mass at St. Catherine's, sitting in the same pew where they'd sat 5 years ago, when everything was impossible and nothing made sense. Maria's parents sat beside them, older now, but still holding hands. Lucas's mother was there too, crying happy tears like she did every Christmas. Miguel and Sarah sat in front, their 3-year-old daughter squirming between them. The priest talked about miracles, about unexpected blessings, about how grace arrives when we least expect it and most need it. Maria listened and thought about Christmas Eve 5 years ago, about Lucas's voice saying, "I loved you," about the choice she'd made to be honest even when honesty felt like destruction. After the service, outside in the snow, Lucas pulled Maria close. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For being brave. For calling off your wedding. For giving us a chance when it looked impossible. For choosing this life, even though it wasn't what you planned." He smiled. "For loving me when you thought it was too late." "It wasn't too late," Maria said. "It was exactly the right time. We just didn't know it yet." They walked home through streets they'd walked 1,000 times, past houses where they knew everyone's names, under stars that looked the same as they had when Maria was 17 and dreaming of escape. But she wasn't dreaming of escape anymore. She was exactly where she wanted to be. That's the thing about love, Maria had learned. It doesn't arrive on a schedule. It doesn't wait for permission or perfect timing or ideal circumstances. It shows up when it shows up, sometimes early, sometimes late, sometimes exactly when you think you've missed your chance. And the only thing that matters is whether you're brave enough to recognize it and honest enough to let it change you. 5 years ago, on Christmas Eve in a small town she'd tried to forget, Lucas Rivera had told Maria Santos the truth. And Maria, after 8 years of running, had finally been ready to hear it. Not because the timing was perfect, the timing was terrible. Not because it was easy, it was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but because sometimes the scariest truth is also the most freeing, and sometimes the love you've been running from is the only love worth having. They'd almost missed each other. For 8 years, they'd circled around what could have been, too afraid to reach for it, too uncertain to try. They'd let timing and fear and carefully laid plans keep them apart when they should have been together. But then, in that one impossible week, in that Christmas when nothing should have changed but everything did, they'd finally been brave. Lucas had told the truth. Maria had listened, and somehow, impossibly, they'd found their way back to something that had been waiting all along. Because some loves aren't meant to be perfect, they're meant to be real. They're meant to arrive when you're ready, not when you're young and certain, but when you're older and brave enough to risk everything for something true. They're meant to teach you that home isn't a place you escape from, but a choice you make every single day. Maria had learned that lesson the hard way. She'd spent 8 years running toward the wrong things before finally having the courage to run back toward the right one. But she'd learned it. And that Christmas, the Christmas they met too late, except it wasn't too late at all, had taught her the most important truth of her life, that love doesn't care about timing, about plans, about what makes sense on paper. Love only cares about honesty, bravery, and the willingness to let yourself be changed. Standing in her living room on Christmas morning 5 years later, watching Lucas make coffee in the kitchen while humming off-key to Christmas carols, Maria thought about the woman she'd been at 31. So certain she knew what she wanted, so convinced she had it all figured out, so close to marrying the wrong person for the right reasons. That woman had been lost, though she hadn't known it. That woman had been running, though she'd called it ambition. That woman had been settling, though she'd called it being practical. And then Lucas had looked at her across a bakery, and everything had cracked open. That Christmas, the one she'd been dreading, had become the most important week of her life, not because it was easy or perfect or looked good in photos, but because it was real, because it forced her to be honest, because it gave her the chance to choose truth over convenience, love over logic, home over escape. "Coffee's ready," Lucas called from the kitchen. And I think I burned the cinnamon rolls." Maria laughed, walking toward him, toward this life they'd built together, toward this small, perfect, ordinary existence that meant everything. "That's okay," she said. "We'll order from Bennett's." "Bennett's it is." Lucas pulled her into his arms, kissed the top of her head. "Merry Christmas, Maria." "Merry Christmas, Lucas." Dean and Maria thought about how sometimes the best gifts arrive when you've stopped expecting them. How sometimes the truest love comes too late according to every logical timeline, but exactly on time according to the heart's calendar. How sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find the one thing you actually need. That Christmas, 5 years ago, Maria had thought she was arriving in Millbrook for one obligatory week before getting back to her real life. She thought she was saying a final goodbye to her childhood, to her past, to the boy who'd never been hers. Instead, she'd been arriving at her beginning. She'd been saying hello to her future. She'd been finally coming home. Because love, real love, doesn't care about timing. It doesn't care about plans or schedules or perfect moments. It only cares about truth. And that Christmas, in the snow, under the lights, Lucas and Maria had finally told each other the truth. It should have been too late. By every measure that mattered, it was too late. But love has a way of making its own time, its own space, its own possibility. And sometimes what looks like the end is actually the beginning. Sometimes what feels like too late is exactly, perfectly, miraculously on time. That was the secret Maria had learned that Christmas, the lesson that had taken her 8 years to understand, that there's no such thing as too late when love is real, when honesty is brave, when two people are finally ready to stop running and start building something true. They'd met too late, except they hadn't. They'd met exactly when they were supposed to, when they were finally ready to be honest, to be brave, to choose each other over everything else. And that, Maria thought, holding Lucas close in their kitchen on Christmas morning, was the real miracle. Not that love had arrived, but that when it did, despite everything, they'd both been ready to let it in. Thanks for watching this incredible story. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel. Here at Heartfelt Storytime, you have new, beautiful stories every day. Don't miss out. See you next time.